Hi, my name is Martin Block. I'm a professor at the University of Virginia in the United States, and I'm going to be talking to you today about modifying team sports. And I'm going to share my screen. All right, so the first thing I want to just introduce you to is the idea that with sports, particularly in physical education setting, you as the physical education teacher can make any modification you want. You have to think to yourself that the games, particularly in the traditional format, of basketball, of football, of volleyball, they don't lend themselves to a lot of participation by children. And oftentimes they're too difficult, even for children without disabilities. So feel free to make modifications in the sports that you're offering. And again, I'm a firm believer that any sport can be modified to include anybody, whether they're a wheelchair user, someone who has a visual impairment, someone with autism. So really be creative in any, and I'm going to give you lots of ideas today. Another thing I think is important is whenever possible, ask the child with a disability to participate in decisions about modifications. They know themselves better than you do, and they often have really good ideas. For example, this looks like a very talented wheelchair basketball player. And I would ask her, how do I modify basketball for you? How do I modify volleyball for you so you can be successful? I also would get input from the children without disabilities because you want them to buy into your modifications. And if you just dictate, this is what we're going to do, I don't care, they're going to be a little bit resentful. But if you ask them, what's a good way that we can make a modification so that everybody has a chance to be successful, I think that's a really good idea here. And then finally, give choices. I love, for example, with volleyball that, okay, when it's your turn to serve in our physical education class playing volleyball, you can choose the ball you want to use and you can stand as close or far away from the net as you want when you serve. So giving choices makes everyone more successful as well. All right, and finally, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about three different models. The games design model, I have it on here and it's been translated for you into Turkish, but I'm not going to talk about that. It's very similar to the other models. It's just another way of making modifications here. So we're going to start with differentiated instruction. Now, differentiated instruction is a model that actually my colleague Carolyn Tomlinson created for children who were gifted. But it later was adopted and revised and applied to children with disabilities. And the idea here is that children are different. They come to you with different ability levels, whether it's physical, uh, cognitive, whatever it is. They all have different levels, and so it makes sense to accommodate them as best you can, so that everybody has a chance to be successful. So let's look at how she defined differentiated instruction. So she created or thought about three specific things: the content, so what are you expecting children to learn? The process, which has to do with how you present information so that children understand it, and the product, how are you measuring success? All right, and so again, if possible, you can use one or two or all three of these when you differentiate instruction that allows everybody a chance to be successful here. So let's do this together and think about a game of tag. All right. So tagging is again running and dodging and fleeing. And we have this young man in a wheelchair. And so when we think about content, I still want him to understand and demonstrate the concepts of moving left and moving right and stopping and things like that. But he'll be doing that with his wheelchair. All right. With children with autism or intellectual disabilities, perhaps they'll be doing it, but they will be doing it a little bit slower and maybe even walking through it. All right. The next part is the process. So how do I explain the game of tag? All right. So for many children, I can just verbally say, these are the rules of tag. You've played before. I might do a little demonstration. For children with autism or an intellectual disability, I may need to pull them aside and one-on-one kind of explain how you would do this. Maybe do some demonstrations. Maybe have some videos to show them. Maybe have some pictures. So again, the process is, how do I present information in a way that everybody understands? Again, think about someone with a visual impairment. I would have to do that differently as well. Maybe have some type of a felt board with braille on it, or do more verbal cues. Someone who's deaf, more sign language and more visual cues. And then finally, the product is, how do I demonstrate that I've improved and I have knowledge of tag. And again, we're talking about mostly dodging and fleeing and trying to tag somebody. And so again, the more skilled children can demonstrate by their ability to tag others. Another child who's a wheelchair user, or perhaps someone who's slower, just the idea that they're attempting to get away, that they're attempting to reach and tag somebody, to me demonstrates they understand. They may not physically be able to do it, but they understand the concepts of the game. And so I think that's an important piece as well. So again, the idea here is that we have these three pieces: content, process, and product, and we want to use them to allow all the children to have a chance to be successful. And I just put a couple of blanks here. Softball or baseball is another one you can think about: content, process, product. Okay. And then you can again think about basketball and volleyball and many other sports as well. All right, something that you may have heard of is something called universal design. And this one's actually a little bit tricky when it comes to physical education. But the idea here is that we are making modifications not solely for the child with a disability, but it's going to be universal, and it's something that's going to be used by all the children. You know, one of the great examples I put down here is the idea of a curb cut. So this is when you have a little lip at the curbs when you're trying to cross the street. For someone who uses a wheelchair, they can't get over that lip of the curb. So at least in the U.S. and many places, they cut slopes so you can use your wheelchair. But that also allows people who may have other mobility issues, older people walking with canes and walkers, parents who have strollers and pushing their children, children riding bicycles. So everybody takes advantage of this one thing about cutting the curb. So everybody has a chance to be successful. Okay. Now, when we think about how do we apply universal design for learning to a physical education setting, I have a couple examples here. And one of the other presenters here this week is Michelle Grenier, and she and her colleague Lauren Lieberman actually just recently wrote a book about using universal design for learning in physical education. So I strongly encourage you to look for that as well. So again, as we think about UDL, we think about, I want to focus on not on the student with a disability alone, but the whole group. All right. So again, one of my favorite examples here, I think I mentioned this already, but with volleyball. Now picture this, where we have the court set up, we've divided into groups of 6 versus 6, and whoever is serving, we have actually 2 racks of balls on right near the serving line. And there's a large kind of inflatable beach ball. There's one of these larger volleyball trainers. There's a regulation volleyball, and maybe there's kind of a foamy ball as well. And there's these balls on each side. And so when the server comes to serve, they get to choose which ball they want to use. And they also get to move as close or as far away as they want to. So now what I like about this is that, so everybody who comes gets to do this. This is the modification for everybody. So if I'm very skilled, I may use a regulation ball and I may serve overhand. If I'm not as skilled, I may choose to stand closer and serve underhand, but still use a regulation ball. And if I'm even less skilled, I may choose one of the larger balls and stand very close to the net. Now, one of the concerns I have is when you make a modification, I don't want to ruin the game for the children without disabilities. So you might say, well, if we're going to be playing with a beach ball or a large ball, that's going to change the game. And it will, but it will only change the game for a few seconds until the next person comes to serve. And what I like about this is I think it'd be fun for all the children. So again, here's this idea of a modification that is not just for one child, it's everybody gets this modification. Baseball and softball is very popular in the US, and we play this in physical education. And one of the things that often happens is that the physical education teacher is the one who pitches the balls to the children. And some of the children can't hit the ball when it's pitched. So what we could do is we could say, okay, for the child with a disability, she gets to hit a ball off a tee. Okay, or following universal design is, let's make a rule for everybody. Everybody gets 2 pitches, and if you miss after 2 pitches, you then will hit a ball off a tee. All right, so again, that becomes universal. And a lot of the children in class will often miss the ball. They don't have disabilities, but this will allow everybody a chance to be more successful. So again, I like this idea of not thinking of just a child with a disability, but thinking about how can I design or create some type of an activity or modification that's really going to help all the children and not ruin the game for everybody. So think about universal design for learning. Okay. So again, think about some other sports here. Here's an example of a young girl She actually looks like she's a little person and she's serving, but using a regulation volleyball. Okay. Now others may use a different size volleyball. Think about soccer and basketball and other sports, and how can you make, universal designs. I'll give you one I can think of right now with soccer, is to make sure it's no one person dominates the game. I could say, if whoever scores a goal, you always go back and play defense, and you'll eventually get to move up, but you then play defense, and so let some other people have a chance to score. So I think that's a nice a modification there. All right, so that's universal design for learning. And then another one of the presenters at the conference here is Ken Black, and he created this model called the STEP model. And there are many ways to modify activities that allow you to include children with and without disabilities. But I find this one to be really easy, and I use this a lot. I think Ken Black did a great job with this one. So the idea here is that there are 4 components that you want to manipulate: space, task, equipment, and people. All right. And again, what you want to do is you want to kind of tweak the games by manipulating space, task, equipment, and people, so it becomes easier for children who may be struggling with the game, or more challenging for those who it's too easy for, so they have to work harder. So let's look at each of these pieces here. So the first one is space. So this has to do with the space you're playing in. So this could be as simple, again, as allowing someone to get closer to the net when they're serving a volleyball, or closer to the pitcher can get closer to the batter, or you can have the first base could be closer. You could play a smaller sided soccer game. You can make those smaller. Again, softball, I could have you running to a base that's closer. So again, the idea here is I'm looking at the space, and I'm trying to think, how can I modify the space to allow children to be more successful? And again, within this model, thinking about universal design. So again, volleyball is you choose where you want to stand when you serve. Everybody gets 2 serves. If you miss your first, feel free to move closer to the net. So again, we have those types of options there. Okay. I put tag up here, again, one of my favorite games at the elementary level. And this is a great thing, is putting some safe spots for children. So if they feel like they're going to be tagged, they can go and stand in the safe spot. Excuse me. The next one is the task. And the task to me is rules. How can I modify rules to allow everybody to be successful? Now, this could be changing rules or imposing rules. So this young man looks like a really good football player. All right. And so I may, for him, say, I would like you during physical education to use your talents to make other people better. So you're allowed to trap the ball and take 2 dribbles, but then you have to pass the ball. All right. And when you're shooting, if you do get close enough to shoot, you have to be actually inside, say 10 meters. That's too far away. Inside, say 5 meters before you could shoot. All right. So again, I'm putting imposing some limitations on this child, and saying, make your teammates better. If you want your team to win, you need to make great passes. You need to tell people where to go, but your talent is not going to be used to dominate the game. All right. So again, you think about the different rules you can do. If I have a child with a disability and we're playing basketball or soccer, we could say, we're going to relax the rules for traveling in basketball. We're not going to have other people steal the ball. She'll get a free pass when she passes the ball. So those are some just simple things to think about. But again, the idea here is I'm saying, what are the rules of the game? And are the rules critical for all the children, or can we change the rules so all the children can be successful? And again, I think that's my point at the very beginning of this, is that games aren't sacred, children are, and how can we make sure all the children have a successful experience? Softball, again, could be as simple as allowing children to hit off a tee as opposed to hitting a pitch ball. So that's the task. Equipment has to do with any number of modifications for equipment. So 2 students I know very well, Sean Healy and Jenny Wong, both of them did their masters in Europe, the European Masters Program. Jenny went on to work at the International Paralympic Committee. Sean went on to get his doctorate with me. He's been in the States, but he's actually moving back to Ireland soon. But they created this really neat framework when we think about equipment. So again, the idea here is that, what are things I can do with equipment to make everybody more successful? So these are just, they call them the 6 S's framework. So you have size, sound, surface, speed, support, and switches. So again, you can kind of see the things I'm talking about here, but size has to do with, a bigger target when practicing overhand throw, a larger ball. If I can't hit a regular Softball, maybe there's a larger ball, maybe there's a larger bat I can use. So again, the size of a basketball, larger basketball. For children with visual impairments, sounds are great. So things that bowling pins that have sounds in it. Or on the opposite case, if you have children with autism who don't like loud sounds, somehow muffling, so having carpet underneath the bowling pins. The surface, a lot of this has to do with kind of color preferences, but if I could tweak the surface so that the children gets to choose the ball they want or the cones they want to stand next to, those things can be really good. Speed is something we can tweak here. Again, when I'm thinking about practicing catching, we often use balloons or scarves, something that slows it down so the child has a chance to be more successful. And the last two here, something supported, it could be a T or something that's hanging down, or for children with more severe disabilities, they touch a switch and it causes a ball to be catapulted in the air. Those are some other adaptations that you can do as well. But again, the idea here is that equipment is something that could make it difficult for a child to be successful. How can we tweak the equipment and so the children can have a chance to be more successful? Here's some kind of questions. What can you do for soccer and basketball and volleyball, softball, tennis? And I'll let you kind of think to yourself, what might be a good modification here? Here's just an example of tennis. We have a smaller court. We have shorter rackets, lighter rackets, but larger heads. We use those larger foam tennis balls. The net may be a little bit smaller. And so again, what we're doing here is we're thinking, how can I make sure you have a chance to be successful? All right. And again, we could do this with a universal design. Everybody chooses the racket they want to use. Everybody chooses the ball they want to use. We have different levels of courts, and you can choose the level of court you want to play. You can play regulation volleyball. You can play modified volleyball. So again, I think equipment is a really good modification here. And the last piece of the STEP model is people. So this has to do with the support that the child receives. Now, it could be having a peer who repeats the directions for the student and maybe guides them. We've done that a lot here in the States with children with autism and intellectual disabilities. We use peers and take advantage of friendships to have them help others. It could be a teacher assistant who comes in and assists the student, or a volunteer. But the idea here is that, does the child need some type of extra support to understand what to do and be successful? All right. And so again, I think this is something that even if you don't have teacher assistants in your schools, getting peers who want to do this, and you're always going to find peers in the class who want to do this, to support that child and provide support and help, whether it's repeating directions, giving the child some extra guidance, extra instruction, all these things are really good here. So I mentioned the games design model, and again, I'll let you look at this at your leisure. There's lots of, they're very similar to the STEP model, just another way of thinking about this. So I'm just gonna scoot through this here. All right, so in summary, what I've talked about very quickly here is this idea of modifications and modifying a team sport so that children with disabilities can be included and have a really fun and safe and successful experience. Going back to my very first point is that any game could be modified to include anybody. All right. And games aren't sacred. And even if the other children are saying, oh, we don't want to change the rules of volleyball, we don't want to change rules of soccer, this is physical education. The idea is that you're educating children and teaching them. And if they want to play regulation basketball, they can do it during recess or after school or with their club team. But in physical education, I'm using my time as a teaching time to help them learn the rules and be successful and learn the skills. So any game can be modified for anybody. Whenever you're making modifications, ideally you want to think about universal design so that it's modification for everyone and not just for the child with a disability. And finally, we talked about differentiated instruction, but I really love this SPACE model. The STEP model, STEP, space, task, equipment, and people. These are all things that can be easily manipulated to accommodate different abilities. And again, think about going up and down. So I could manipulate these to make it more challenging for my skilled children and easier for my less skilled children. All right, thank you so much for your time. I'm going to stop sharing. And thank you again.